As I've been studying the American Revolution, the untold stories have really jumped out at me. The stories that really don't get much play in the common pop cultural discourse of the topic. I was really fascinated by Benedict Arnold's attempted invasion of Quebec in autumn of 1775. And what really grabs my attention was when I learned that the expedition crossed some land concurrent with the modern Appalachian Trail, part of a section that I myself had hiked. And it occurred to me, it's one thing to be sitting at home in a comfortable armchair, reading a book about, the invasion of Quebec and looking at the maps, at the comfort of your fireside and think, oh man, they took a wrong turn there. Oh, they were just made so many mistakes here. This sort of path added weeks onto their journey. Oh, why on earth did they do that? If I was in that situation, I would have known better. And it's another thing to strap your hiking boots on, pack some food in a bear bag, rent a canoe, and fucking do it yourself.
Got in the boat and we were off, suddenly into a storm.
We were squalled. We've run aground.
Not like we're in danger, but when you're being very heavily inconvenienced, you start to be willing to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do.
Hey guys, how you guys doing today? Regular day for me, same old, dragging a boat up a mountain.
This is a bitch. We haven't even gone a mile.
It's a beautiful bitch.
Much like the actual Arnold expedition, our estimation of this terrain was colored by just wildly naive optimism. So over the past 10 years or so, I've done the entire Appalachian Trail in Maine, in, kind of just little sections of like a week or two at a time. And Maine is like one of the last sort of wild places on the East Coast. So I think I've got my work cut out for me, but of course, adventures are best done with friends. And I could think of no one better for this expedition than my buddy Benton Guinness, who I've known since college. He's an immensely talented actor who starred in a film I directed called The Sudbury Devil. And we've always wanted to do a trip like this.
What's up, brother?
You look amazing.
Welcome.
Oh, this whole thing?
Welcome to spooky-ass New England. On this expedition, Benton and I will attempt one of the most difficult and dangerous passages the Continental Army traversed on their way to Quebec. In 1775, the Dead River ran through this wilderness. But in 1950, the Central Maine Power Corporation flooded this whole valley to power a hydroelectric dam, creating the 35-mile-long Flagstaff Lake. We found a canoe to rent in the town of Eustis, Maine, so we'll actually be doing the route backwards. We'll cross the lake by boat, exploring as we go, and in particular, we want to make landfall to climb the Bigelow mountain range to the south. Then it's time for a grueling 12-mile portage known as the Great Carrying Place, over the mountainous terrain of the Appalachian Trail to the waters of the Kennebec River. Then we'll turn around and do the whole thing again, heading back to Eustis 7 days and 120 miles later. Normally, right, if you're trying to get from like the Atlantic to Quebec, it would make the most sense just by water to go up the Kennebec and then down the Dead River here. But these are like all rapids. In fact, you can kind of see it on Google Maps.
But we are going...
You see that?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these are all rapids.
It's already white.
Yeah, so that is like best avoided. So what the Abenaki found out was that it was just easier to carry over here and just break it up with the ponds and then end up in, this used to be the Dead River, it's now Flagstaff Lake, which, as you know, was flooded in the 50s.
There's also, it's not a touchscreen. There's also...
Enhance! Last shower for a week, here we go. Riding electric with Adam. Welcome to Maine. Not gonna lie, I slept like total dog shit. I feel terrible. Barely slept at all. I think I maybe got 3 hours or something. Now we're driving up to within 20 miles of the Canadian border.
I commend you to your fate. They say the wilderness changes a man.
Mr. Guinness, to the poop deck, if you please.
Hey,
Bon voyage.
bon voyage, baby.
I haven't been in a canoe in a long time because I live in New York, but I grew up on the Mississippi. We had a canoe, and I feel like riding a bike with it. But if you don't ride a bike for 10 years, you lose a little bit. That sense of getting back in the boat on the first day made me want to cry because it feels like rejuvenating an old skill, plus the natural beauty, the adventure ahead. Nothing bad happening yet except the GoPro, which is hilarious. Way to start, actually.
The fucking GoPro just fell off of the fucking boat. The suction cup that I attached it with was such a piece of shit. And it just sank right to the bottom of the lake. And of course we've been in shallow water for the last, 45 minutes. And of course it was the one bit of deep water. Ugh.
Benedict Arnold problems.
This is historically accurate. This is historically accurate because the Arnold expedition had so many issues with equipment. 5 years before committing the most infamous act of treason in American history, Benedict Arnold was a rising star in the nascent Continental Army. In the summer of 1775, he was a 34-year-old merchant from New Haven, Connecticut, with prematurely graying hair and an intemperate personality. Like many fire-eating Whigs, Arnold had rushed to Cambridge, Massachusetts in the aftermath of Lexington and Concord to join the revolutionary Massachusetts Provincial Army, which was besieging the British-held city of Boston. He immediately displayed a mind for military strategy and a knack for taking the initiative. As we say in my family, Arnold was a doer. Over the course of just a few weeks, he was commissioned a colonel, raised several companies of militia, and rushed up to the vicinity of Lake Champlain, where, with the help of Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Boys, he captured Fort Ticonderoga from a sleeping British garrison that was not yet aware that their country was at war. Arnold remained in upstate New York for 3 months, where apparently both local indigenous people and Quebecois tradesmen he encountered assured him that the populace of Canada had no great love for king and parliament. In fact, they said many Canadians would welcome an invading American army as liberators, delivering them from British occupation. This wasn't entirely accurate. Most Canadians only cared about the outcome of this squabble to the extent that it affected them. But the advantages of seizing Montreal and Quebec City were obvious to the Americans. At this early stage, the province was still lightly defended. The conquest would deprive the British of formidable defensive fortifications that might prove impregnable once fully garrisoned. It would bring significant stores of food and weapons into continental hands, adding to the British Army's already enormous disadvantage in supply lines. And it would make the Americans master of the waterway along the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River, the economic lifeline of the lucrative northern fur trade. American attitudes toward Quebec and its inhabitants were complicated. The Quebec Act of 1774, passed during the same session of Parliament as the infamous so-called Intolerable Acts, which attempted to dismantle the democratic institutions of Massachusetts, had repealed some of the British Empire's repressive policies toward practicing Catholics, and restored some elements of French civil law in the province. The act was part of a greater cultural trend in the late 18th century, which emancipated Catholic British subjects from legal oppression. The Quebec Act horrified Whigs in the 13 colonies, who objected to it on the grounds of both secular Enlightenment principles and good old-fashioned cultural chauvinism. Though the act was intended to be pluralistic, it granted the Catholic Church certain powers over provincial law. This was a big no-no for the Founding Fathers, who understandably regarded any semblance of state religion as unspeakably dangerous. Moreover, the 13 colonies were, of course, overwhelmingly Protestant, and New England had been fighting bloody frontier wars against the Quebecois for nearly 100 years. To them, French Canada was the apotheosis of the arbitrary feudal tyranny to which their Puritan-founded bourgeois democracy was civilizationally opposed. Protestant pamphlets from the 1770s railing against Catholic emancipation are feverish with the slippery slope exhortations of the paradox of tolerance. Give Catholics an inch now and they'll take a mile later, stripping us of our rights as Englishmen and making church canon the law of the land. Fundamentally, it was this anti-Catholic xenophobia which made the invasion of the 14th colony infinitely preferable to its peaceful incorporation to the revolutionary movement. And in early August 1775, Arnold returned to Cambridge to share his proposal for a Canadian campaign with the commander of the newly formed Continental Army, George Washington. During this meeting, the two men came up with a plan for a pincer movement on the St. Lawrence Valley. Major General Philip Schuyler would lead 1,000 men up the well-trod route from Ticonderoga up Lake Champlain to assault Montreal. While the British were preoccupied with him, Arnold would lead another 1,000 men in a secret expedition through the wilderness of Maine, along the Kennebec, Dead, and Chaudière rivers, the last of which pops into the St. Lawrence just above Quebec City. It was a daring gamble. The entire Continental Army around this time was only about 16,000 men strong, and the invasion would be a significant diversion of its manpower. Furthermore, summer was almost over. There could be no room for delay, or the Americans would be marching straight into the teeth of a Canadian winter. And before they faced a single British musket, Arnold's men had to survive a journey across what they regarded as the darkest, most dangerous wilderness on the eastern seaboard of North America. Even 150 years into colonization, the Maine woods had been barely charted by Europeans. The Arnold expedition had just one single map of the area, drawn by John Montresor 15 years earlier, a map that would, in time, prove disastrously inaccurate. For the New Englanders who made up the bulk of the expedition, the northern forests called up strong cultural memories of the generations of brutal intracolonial wars, when the nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy and their French allies would apparate like ghosts from this satanic wilderness, to burn towns, slaughter families, and drag women and children away as captives, never to be seen again. The abiding terror New Englanders had of these woods had incensed their ancestors into the paranoia of the Salem witch trials, and now they were to plunge right into them on a wing and a prayer. So on September 13th, 1775, Arnold and his army marched out of camp at Cambridge up toward Newburyport, on Massachusetts' North Shore. There they boarded ships which carried them, in inclement weather, to the rocky mouth of the Kennebec River in Maine. Near the homestead of Reuben Colburn, a prominent local Whig, the soldiers disembarked from their transports and moved all their considerable equipment to 200 bateaux, flat-bottom, shallow-draft wooden boats that you steer using 12-foot poles with iron points to push against river bottoms. General Washington had written to Colburn previously ahead of the expedition's arrival and asked him to construct the bateau, which he did in just 14 days. Unfortunately for Arnold's army, the haste of the request forced Colburn to build the boats out of green wood, which made them significantly heavier. Each bateau weighed about 400 pounds, and working with a shortage of nails. It was apparent to everyone that the poorly constructed bateau would cause problems, but the expedition had no other options. Preparations took longer than expected. It wasn't until September 24th that Arnold was ready to send 2 small scouting parties ahead to reconnoiter the route. The next morning, 3 companies of Captain Daniel Morgan's Virginian riflemen went upriver as a vanguard to blaze trails on the portages. The rest of the army departed piecemeal over the following days, with a division under Colonel Roger Enos bringing up the rear with most of the supplies. Upriver travel in the leaky bateau immediately proved extraordinarily difficult. The soldiers were constantly beset by falls, rapids, and hidden rocks. Sometimes they were forced to wade in chest-deep water, hauling the bateau by hand, but then ran the risk of getting suddenly sucked underwater when the river got unexpectedly deep. Everyone and everything was constantly sopping wet. Water got into their casks of food, spoiling their bread and vegetables. Coincidentally, they also quickly discovered that the salt beef they'd packed was rotten, inedibly so. Dysentery spread in the ranks, and the first frost came at the end of September. With each passing night, it was getting colder and colder and colder. On October 2nd, Arnold caught up with Morgan's riflemen at Norridgewock, a former French and indigenous settlement which had been wiped off the map by vengeful English colonists in 1724. In many ways, this expedition was not much different. These men, and the handful of women who accompanied them, called themselves soldiers of the Continental Army, but this wasn't an army. Not really, not yet. These were 1,000 merchants, farmers, mechanics, and woodsmen in street clothes, united only by their hatred of tyranny. Virtually none of them had extensive military experience, and discipline was already starting to break down. Above Norridgewock was a series of short waterfalls, which the soldiers bypassed via a mile-long portage. It took the entire expedition a full week to get through that 1 mile. And whatever sense of accomplishment they might have felt at finishing this brutal carry must have been tempered with the cold knowledge that north of this ruined settlement, there wouldn't be a single sign of European civilization until they reached Quebec. And with that, the Arnold expedition left the lands of the United Colonies and were off to do their part on the first major offensive campaign in the history of the American Army.
Torn from a world of tyrants beneath this western sky, we formed a new dominion, a land of liberty. The world shall own we're masters here, then hasten on the day. Huzzah, 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 huzzah.
It's raining.
For free America.
So one other thing I've discovered is that this hunting shirt is a terrible raincoat. You'd think that that linen wouldn't keep out moisture at all, and you'd be right.
So we're going to Myers Lodge. Let's see how the tenting is there. And by my calculations, Meyer Lodge is just about at the end of that rainbow, so maybe we'll be finding that Benedict Arnold gold.
We have literally been presented with one of the most stunning rainbows I've ever seen in my life. We can literally see both ends of the rainbow touching on Lake Flagstaff.
Then guard your rights, Americans, nor stoop to lawless way. Oppose, 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 oppose for North America.
Yeah, I think we're having it slightly cushier than Benedict Arnold did.
How so?
That's my first impression.
What would the difference be for them?
Well, they wouldn't have picnic tables for one.
Okay, all right.
They wouldn't have designated campsites. Would have been a lot colder. You know, we had rain, which they had a lot of rain, but
When did they do it? Was it winter?
it was autumn.
Okay.
Yeah. And autumn up here gets fucking cold. They got snowed on. They had like hard freezes. There were like times when it was like raining overnight, and their clothes would freeze to their bodies with the thickness of a pane of glass.
What?
Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't happen tonight. The second day started really strong. We were exploring a lot of the islands in this artificial lake, trying to get a feel for the landscape. And we've run aground, Mr. Guinness. And Benson was hilarious. You know, he was giddy as a schoolboy. Anytime we landed on, an island or, an interesting beach or something, it was almost as if it was, a role-playing game where the name of the location would kind of pop up on the screen and go dun dun, and it's whatever stupid name that we gave it. I mean, might be a loon. It doesn't look like bird shit though.
What's good, Stick Nation? I'm out here in Maine, and I just unearthed the ancient moose driftwood great blade with dual spike hilts, sturdy handle, and wide, thick, moose antler style chopping abilities. Also can be used as a paddle in emergency. All around mooser's blade.
Fascinating island. I believe it's time, though, to take our crimson discovery on to different shores.
What just happened? We were squalled. But we got strong oarsmen. Made it ashore. We've run aground intentionally.
This is a lesson of look before you bring your boat up onto a shoreline. We accidentally pulled it up into this bed of mint plants. And this whole area, this whole little meadow by the shoreline smells incredible.
As soon as we landed, harsh landing through some rocks, and we went,
Oh my God.
should smell nice.
Oarsman Minthead. We had spent all sort of day exploring and then had to make a mad dash for what we planned to have as our campsite. But it was much further away than we thought, and the waves were with us, the wind was with us, but it still took much longer than we thought. And before we knew it, the sun had gone down.
And it went from like, we're fine, we'll speed, but we'll be fine, to like, oh, we gotta hurry up, but we'll be fine, to like, oh, we gotta hurry up, I hope we'll be fine, to we're not gonna be fine, so let's hurry up and just get whatever we can.
Racing against the sunset. Hopefully we'll make camp in time.
And we missed hard.
All right, so we ran out of time. The sun went down. We're not at the campsite. We ended up at just some like fucking horrible beach somewhere. We were on some very forbidding, uninviting shore, this rock beach, and then thick woods uphill. Nowhere that looked like a suitable campsite. We're gonna haul the boat into the woods and hide it, and then we're gonna try to hike overland to where we know that there's a campsite. So we clicked our headlamps on and started bushwhacking through the brush. Eventually we kind of end up on this very old, overgrown road, and at the end of the road was a house in the middle of the woods on this island with no lights on. At this point, you know, we didn't know. I guess we'd stumbled off of public lands and onto private property. And what we were both thinking, which we later said, but none of us, I think, could say it in the moment because it felt a little too real, was like, this is, you know, the setup of a horror movie, you know, the lost hikers in the woods going up to the mysterious house and don't, hey, we need help, you know, and then get, you know, viciously murdered or whatever. So we're not in our campsite after all, but it turns out it's on another island. And actually it's within view. We can see lights over there. Somebody at our campsite. We meanwhile had to bushwhack multiple times through thick woods, which I normally would never want to do. You know, when you're not like we're in danger, but you know, when you're being sort of very heavily inconvenienced, you know, you start to be willing to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. I'm starting to understand why those guys on the Arnold expedition ate that dog. I had fun. Did you have fun, Benton?
1000%. Having fun now. little sore, but having fun with it.
I think, you know, what we didn't do was we didn't plan for the unexpected. And I think that's an important lesson to always, no matter if it's a beautiful day, no matter if, you know, you're an experienced outdoorsman, you still have to plan for the unexpected. On October 12th, 1775, some riflemen of Daniel Morgan's company were hacking down trees to clear a trail across the great carrying place when a handful of haggard, gaunt starvelings with huge beards lurched half dead out of the trees, begging the Virginians for something to eat. The travelers were in such bad shape, it took a moment for Morgan's company to recognize them. They were one of the scouting parties Colonel Arnold had sent north weeks previously. They had reconnoitered as far north as the Height of Land, the mountain ridge which separates Maine's Atlantic watershed from that of the St. Lawrence River, and all they'd gained from their travails was horror stories and severe malnourishment. Benedict Arnold and the main body of troops, meanwhile, had arrived at the eastern terminus of the great carrying place, and began to undertake the enormous logistical challenge of getting 200 bateaux, 1,000 men, and all their equipment over a 12-mile carry with an ascent of more than 1,100 feet. Dr. Isaac Center, the expedition's physician, wrote in his diary that the trailblazing riflemen had done, quote, little to alter the face of nature and remove obstacles from the Army's path. Despite their efforts, the forest remained nearly impenetrable, and due to the heavy loads they were carrying, the soldiers needed to traverse it multiple times, first lugging the bateau a certain distance, then returning for food casks, then returning again for their armaments. It wasn't unusual for a boat crew to pass over the same piece of ground 7 or 8 times. The first day, they were beset by high winds, and even those who were able to reach the first pond that breaks up the great carrying place portage found it impossible to row across. Though there were plenty of trout in the pond to eat, the water was yellow and scummy, and expedition members who drank it were stricken with diarrhea and vomiting. Then it began to rain. The ground turned to swamp and quick mud, and men sank to their knees in the soft, wet earth as they bore the full weight of the 400-pound boats. There were no tents for the rank and file, and so at night they were forced to sleep on the wet ground exposed to the elements. The expedition inched across the great carrying place over the course of the following week, going nearly single file in many places, a serpentine line of people and provisions going for miles through the forest. Sickness in the ranks became such a major problem that Arnold ordered the construction of 2 crude blockhouses for use as field hospitals, one of which, built on the shore of the Kennebec at the start of the carry, quickly filled with men who were clearly too sick to continue and had to return south. After the second pond of the carry, the going became considerably worse. Arnold wrote in his journal that the trail was, quote, choked with roots, a familiar sight to any Appalachian hiker. By now it was the 3rd week of October, long past the date which Arnold had confidently predicted to General Washington that he would be at the gates of Quebec City. Faced with the very real possibility of failure, Arnold ordered that a share of provisions be left behind at the easternmost blockhouse to, quote, secure our retreat should the expedition need to turn back. With the soldiers' spirits at an all-time low, Arnold reached the 3rd and westernmost pond of the carry, where he first caught sight of the forbidding mountains we now call the Bigelow Range. He was still more than 80 miles from the French settlements on the Chaudière. And the expedition was running out of food. With so many holdups and logistical problems, many companies had to remain in place for several days at a time, chewing through their provisions at an alarming rate. Most of the food casks were with Colonel Enos at the rear of the army, a cautious, one might even say stingy man, who was loath to part with supplies that might be of use to his troops. Privately, Enos's belief in the campaign's success was precariously wavering. After the westernmost pond, the trail passed through a spruce bog before finally plummeting down into a creek which led into the Dead River, today the waters of Flagstaff Lake. The waterway's ominous name was due to its unusually still and sluggish waters, but unfortunately for the expedition, they wouldn't remain so for very long, as a fierce autumn storm hung over the valley, dumping day after day of torrential rain. On the dismal night of October 21st, the soldiers of Colonel Christopher Green's division made camp along the banks of the Dead. Due to the inclement conditions, they decided to sleep on a hill about 8 or 9 feet high, in case the river should flood in the night. But in the pre-dawn darkness, several men were awakened by the feeling of ice-cold water lapping at their feet and seeping into their bedrolls. The river had overtopped its banks by as much as 12 vertical feet in some places, sweeping away food, boats, weapons, and supplies. Arnold's group, encamped a few miles away, were caught in the same torrent, and it took the entire next day for them to dry out all their clothes and equipment. After the storm finally subsided, those who were able to continue crawling up the swollen Dead found that the land was flooded about a mile in either direction, making the landscape appear not too dissimilar from modern Lake Flagstaff. Most of the men proceeded by wading through its shallows, while those in bateau pulled themselves along by grabbing at passing tree trunks. Several bateaux were now getting stoved in by rocks, swept off waterfalls and dashed to pieces, or simply just falling apart from bad construction and hard use. One such bateau held a small fortune in gold and silver coins, the men's pay, which was lost when the boat got split apart by rapids and the money sank in deep water. It was a tremendous loss for the campaign. But curiously enough, 4 years later, 2 local guides on the expedition, named John and Nehemiah Getchell, suddenly and very mysteriously came into a huge quantity of cash. In 1779, these lower-class Maine farmers spent a staggering $4,000 buying enormous tracts of land along the Kennebec River. Then, starting on October 23rd, devastating news began spreading up the bedraggled column of troops. Colonel Enos, Arnold's second in command and leader of the rearguard division, had unilaterally decided that the expedition was hopeless and turned back toward the Kennebec with 450 men, half of the Army's overall strength. On October 27th, the news reached Captain Henry Dearborn, a precocious young patriot in his mid-20s who would later go on to be Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of War. Dearborn recorded in his diary that the tidings filled the men with outrage and disbelief. The soldiers around him made a, quote, general prayer that Enos and his division would die or meet with some horrible disaster during their retreat. And they weren't the only ones. When Enos reached the lower Kennebec, there were no transports to take him and his soldiers back to Massachusetts, so they all had to march by road through Maine and New Hampshire. Everywhere they went, they were met with suspicion and disdain by the heavily Whig populace. In Cambridge, Enos himself was court-martialed, but as the only witnesses available were his own officers, the court acquitted and released him. Arnold was left with a severely depleted force, most of whom were too deep into the wilderness to turn back themselves. No one had enough food to get back over the Great Carrying Place and down the Kennebec. But if they rationed hard, they might be able to make it up north to the Quebecois villages on the Chaudière. However, that would, of course, depend on whether the locals decided to be friendly, which was a very, very big if. All that was left of the expedition was totally committed now. They would reach Quebec or die trying. How do you feel, Benton?
I went to bed last night feeling like I had been beaten with a crucifix, strapped to it, and then laid down to go to sleep. I could not. Body was wrecked. But actually, you know, happy accidents. On the beach, the sound of the waves. I slept way better tonight than last night. It was so peaceful. I feel ready as hell. I'm not broken. Day 3. I'm not broken.
I don't wanna bushwhack today, but the Lord of the Lake says, nay, nay, nay. Bushwhack, 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 bushwhack. Wake up now, wake up quick. Brush your teeth, whack your dick. Coming in your tent, coming in your tent, coming in your tent, coming in your tent. Lord of the bushwhack. Come in his face if it comes in his tent.
I wanted to be as close to them as possible and only use the map to orient and maybe a compass.
Yeah.
Gotta say, last night that became not something I wanted to adhere to.
Yeah,
And using the GPS really changes the game.
it does.
They couldn't do that. Yeah, man, I would have been out here, we would have been out here like most of the night probably. I kept falling into like quick mud.
Yeah.
Like sinking mud.
Yeah.
I very nearly lost the boot.
And we would have loved to have gotten it on camera, but it was just too depressing. No, but it was just the, you know, when you're in kind of emergency mode, you gotta put the camera down, you know? Heyo! It's the fucking boat! We made it! That's our campsite last night. And that's where we were supposed to be, Hurricane Island.
So close.
So close. So it's a little after 2 p.m. on day 3. We're just stopping to have some lunch. Mango sticky rice, yum. And we're tenting here right now, but we're actually gonna be back here tonight so we can hike Mount Bigelow. So there's a trail that leads about 2.5 miles up to the Appalachian Trail where we can look down at the old Dead River Valley, now currently Flagstaff Lake, from 3,000 feet up. Mount Bigelow, by the way, named after the member of the Arnold expedition, Timothy Bigelow, who was said to have gone up to its summit to see if he could see Quebec, but he didn't. He didn't. The spires of Quebec City were quite a bit further away than he thought. That's the trail.
We're almost at the top of Bigelow Mountain. And it just started raining. Please be the summit. Please be the summit.
Oh my God! Check out this place! The alpine regions of New Hampshire and Maine are just unlike anywhere on the planet. I just love it up here. It is so inhospitable and alien, and it looks like fucking Mordor. And we can see very clearly Flagstaff Lake, where we've come from. Wild blueberries. Oh my fucking God.
Hey, so if you're at all curious about the movie that Benton and I made together, did you know that you can watch it on Tubi, Apple TV, and Prime Video? But the best way to support the filmmakers is to buy it from us directly at Atun-Shei It's pretty cool. Here's a clip. Benton and I kissing it, not on the lips, sadly for you. When Colonel Enos's division had abandoned the expedition, they had, outrageously, hauled away far more food than they actually needed for their retreat, parting with only 2 barrels of flour. This was scarcely enough food for the men charged with bringing the barrels back up to what remained of the beleaguered army, which was beginning to starve. As the soldiers pressed up to the source of the dead river and climbed the mountainous height of land, men in Colonel Greene's division were reduced to melting candles down into a kind of gruel. They boiled their belts and shoes and chewed at the leather. Those lucky enough to still have flour mixed it with ash from their campfires to make their bread a little bit more substantial. The constant rain started turning to snow. Temperatures were plummeting, especially in the high elevations. It was probably a high in the low 40s in the daytime and could easily get down to the teens at night. Ever a man of action, Colonel Arnold refused to just sit around and watch his army deteriorate. He hurried over the height of land ahead of the rest of the army in a light birch canoe with just a handful of men to reach Quebec and hopefully bring back food. Arnold's party descended from the mountains and paddled across Lake Megantic, a long, thin body of water surrounded by dismal swamps. Anticipating what a slog these marshes would be for the main force, by now traveling overwhelmingly on foot, he sent word back to his officers that they should avoid the lake entirely and instead strike out northeast through the woods. Once Arnold arrived at the Chaudière River, he met with a faint spark of hope. A scout he had previously sent forward to the village of Sardigan, today Saint-Georges, Quebec, returned with intelligence that the inhabitants were friendly to the American cause. What's more, Quebec City was sparsely defended and seemed ripe for the taking. Buoyed by the news, Arnold pressed on. On October 30th, his small group met with 2 Penobscot people in the woods who helped the Americans over a portage and confirmed that they were less than 10 miles from the southernmost French-built houses on the Chaudière, which they reached, no doubt to Arnold's immense relief, later that day. Arnold and the advance team were safe in civilization, but most of his army was still many miles back, still bushwhacking through the howling labyrinth of the northern wilderness. Once over the height of land, those traveling by foot followed Arnold's instructions to avoid Lake Megantic, but unbeknownst to them, this was the least accurate section of Montresor's map. There weren't forests to the east of Megantic, there were more lakes and more marshes. Dr. Center described the area as, quote, the most execrable bogmire imaginable. An entire division of the army spent 2 days and 2 nights hopelessly lost in this nightmarish frozen fen. Most of them didn't have a single bite to eat during all that time. Their torn clothes and ruined shoes were rotting off their bodies, and soldiers were starting to die in large numbers. Most simply collapsed from hunger or exhaustion and were incapable of rising again. Some died of exposure during the freezing nights. Others fell out of the line of march and vanished into the swamps, never to be seen again. One Pennsylvania rifleman remembered later in life how the wife of one soldier who had accompanied the army all the way from Massachusetts suddenly realized that her husband wasn't with the group. Someone remembered that they had seen him collapse from illness under a tree a few miles back. With tears in her eyes, the wife begged her companions to wait for her while she retrieved her husband. The group waited an hour. The couple didn't show. They moved on. By this point, the idea of besieging and capturing Quebec City was almost laughable. This was no longer a military campaign. It was a desperate struggle for survival. On Halloween, most of the army had, by some miracle, survived the swamps and reunited with the boat crews at the Chaudière River north of Lake Megantic. Chaudière means cauldron in French, and the river lived up to its name, presenting the expedition with miles upon miles of boiling white rapids. After a long day fighting his way down these rapids by boat, Captain Henry Dearborn was approached in camp by Captain William Goodrich and some of the men in his company, with a sensitive request. Dearborn was traveling with his beloved dog, a big black Labrador, and Goodrich's men were starving to death. Dearborn consented to give his pupper up. His comrades killed him and ate all of his flesh and organs, including his intestines. They then boiled his bones for soup. The Black Lab was one of 3 dogs the soldiers would kill and eat in the first days of November. On the dawn of the 2nd, several soldiers in one encampment were unable to rise from their bedrolls. As one survivor put it, quote, "It was thought best," interesting use of the passive voice there, "that those who were strong enough to continue should leave those soldiers to their fates." The sick men didn't die quietly, though, and as their friends struck camp and disappeared into the woods, they called out plaintively after them, begging for their lives. But later that day, a little further north, Captain Dearborn looked up from the trail to see something almost unbelievable. A group of Quebecois villagers were leading several farmed animals and a wagon load of flour to the relief of the ravenous Continentals. Arnold had come through for his men. The sight caused Dearborn to suddenly break out in tears. When the Quebecois reached a group of riflemen behind Dearborn, the soldiers stared at one another, quote, "doubting our senses." 2 cows were immediately killed. The riflemen tore the animals apart and ate them raw. One soldier who arrived too late to partake in this feast witnessed a New Englander, quote, "gorging on the last bit of colon, half rinsed, half broiled." Most of the rest of the surviving expedition members reached the safety of the Quebecois villages on November 3rd, in the midst of a heavy snowstorm. For their part, the locals were astonished to see hundreds of cadaverous soldiers emerge from the wilderness, looking, quote, "more like ghosts than men." But they did what they could to administer to their needs. However, surviving the Maine woods was the easy part. Despite the friendly dispositions of the Chaudière Quebecois, Arnold's army was now in enemy country. And now, at less than half their original strength, with a critical shortage of muskets, powder, and warm clothing, these weak and malnourished revolutionaries had to capture one of the most formidable fortresses in North America. So the Great Carrying Place, oh my God, a total underestimation in my part. When I was hiking the Great Carrying Place on one of my AT section hikes, I remembered it being very easy, and it is very easy, relative to other sections of the AT in northern New England. When you add 90 pounds of boat, it all of a sudden is not very easy. All right, well, we've done it. We've crossed Lake Flagstaff, the Old Dead River, and we're about to embark in the Great Carrying Place. Lashing.
oars are getting up properly.
With the packs and with the weight of the canoe and just the formation of everything that we had going, a classic portage carry of the canoe was difficult to impossible.
We saved the easiest stuff for last because we're not sore at all.
This is a bitch. We haven't even gone a mile.
It's a beautiful bitch.
We were carrying about 100 pounds each now at this point through a rocky, rooty trail.
Okay, so we've portaged to near exhaustion, and we've maybe gone half a mile.
Why are you carrying this boat again?
We're going to the Kennebec.
Why are you going to the Kennebec?
We're insane.
I don't understand.
So, sir, we're gonna head up to Quebec and take it over. What do you think about that?
Hey, fuck off from Quebec. Get out of here. We're waiting for you, dumbasses.
This is uphill, but it's really straight. Drag it.
Okay.
Drag it. So much lighter.
I don't know if we can do this.
We've been out here 3 hours. 3 more hours, we won't even be at the creek unless we are scooting.
But it's 3 p.m., seriously.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, yeah. When we start portaging this boat, it's just like, oh, okay. Like, it's just gonna be much harder than we thought. Progress is gonna be much slower than we thought. And it was absolutely backbreaking. So here we're looking at an elevation map. We started at Flagstaff Lake there. We're going up there with this fucking boat. And then we've got to go up there and then down to the West Carey Pond. And that is a fraction of what we expected to be able to do today. Much like the actual Arnold expedition, our estimation of this terrain was colored by just wildly naive optimism.
That took some of my adrenaline. Let me just sit for 1 second.
What did we just try to do?
We tried the proper carry once more, because in my experience, that is the best and fastest way. But with the bags, we're like just smacking into each other. Like Andy's nose is tucked into my front zip of my backpack. We can't see anything.
We're slowing down. We were going a mile an hour up this mountain. Now we're going, I don't know how fast, but less. We need to take frequent breaks. You know, we climbed 3,000 feet yesterday. We've been paddling for, 2 days before that. So we made it maybe 3.5, 4 miles. Benton's toe was bleeding. My back was absolutely screaming with pain. And, Benton was game for anything. Benton would have taken it all the way to the Kennebec if I had asked him to. But, we have to head back tomorrow if we want to be able to get the boat back to John and Eustace, who we rented it from. So I just called it, and I just said, listen, we are at the limits of what we can safely endure. And if we get injured, our wives are going to kill us.
The only issue for me would be that you didn't get what you want out of the video.
I don't want either of us to get injured. We aren't actually going to war, right? And, my back is fucking killing me, man. I'm not gonna lie. And, I'm just not willing to get injured for a YouTube video. You know what I mean? So we ditched the canoe in the woods. And we are gonna leave it there overnight while we forge on ahead to the West Carey Pond. Only the first
pond of the Great Carrying Place, which is depressing, but we did a respectable 4 miles up this fucking mountain. And we're gonna, you know what? We're gonna reward ourselves for reaching our physical limit by drinking some rum and going swimming.
Ah. Oh God. What? What even is that? Oh. Ah!
These are the slimiest rocks. Oh my God. I gotta go back on all fours. Oh, like a raccoon. I need the salamander. Like Gollum.
I mean, my legs don't work no more, so.
The Arnold expedition endured the Maine wilderness for more than a month, a fair bit longer than Benton and I's 6.5 days. But I'm no stranger to living in the woods. And even in just that short time traversing the Continental's route, we were continually struck by just how small and weak mere humans are in the face of nature. And I'm not sure that this is a lesson Benedict Arnold learned particularly well. And you know what, who can blame him? Thoreau was still decades away. New Englanders at that time did not have the healthiest relationship with Mother Nature, to say the least. On one hand, the Army's mere survival is an enormous testament to their intelligence, their creativity, their determination, and their dedication. The fact that these people didn't all kill and eat each other is a huge credit to them. That said, though, I think there is an element of colonial hubris at play here, of a really egregious lack of respect toward the wild places of this world. I mean, think about it. The expert woodsmen that Arnold brought along with him were from Virginia and Pennsylvania. They only recruited a few Mainers, seemingly as an afterthought, just locals they picked up along the Kennebec. And you know, of course, it must be said that it appears not to have even occurred to Arnold, Washington, or anybody else to bring along 1 or 2 Abenaki guides. You know, the people who have lived in Western Maine for thousands of years and have been making the same journey from New England to Canada pretty regularly for about a century. And the ultimate irony is that this journey, extraordinary as it was all for nothing. After arriving at the St. Lawrence River, Arnold made an abortive thrust against Quebec City on November 13th, before determining that his enervated troops had no chance of storming the walls. He had already lost the element of surprise due to a pair of intercepted letters and chatty loyalists in the Chaudière Valley, and the British had managed to scrape together more than 1,100 men to defend the city. So he decided to wait for Schuyler's column, which after its commanding officer had fallen ill in New York, was now commanded by the Irish-American General Richard Montgomery. It wasn't until December 31st, 1775, when the combined American armies of Arnold and Montgomery charged through a blinding blizzard to assault Quebec City. Both commanders were almost immediately shot. Arnold through the left leg, the same limb that would be crippled at Saratoga 2 years later. Montgomery took grape shot to the head, killing him. The confused and disorganized attack quickly dissolved, and over 350 Americans were captured. 30 men who had survived the wilds of Maine would later die over the winter, rotting in a British prison. After the battle, Arnold was promoted to brigadier general. Despite the defeat, he spent much of the first half of 1776 tenaciously holding on to what gains the American invasion had made in Canada, before getting pressed back by British reinforcements from the Old Country. His later actions at Valcour Bay and Saratoga made him a legend, but the man's sense of entitlement and high-conflict personality was already setting the stage for his fateful and despicable betrayal. The Maine woods, meanwhile, remained unconquered. It wouldn't be until almost a century later that the logging industry finally brought large-scale permanent European settlement to this region. Thankfully, it remains relatively sparsely populated even to this day, with huge tracts of wilderness area like Lake Flagstaff, the Bigelow Range, and the Appalachian Trail corridor held in public trust. To the wild. I think it's safe to say we were defeated by the Great Carrying Place.
You can see the lake.
I was a little bummed, to be honest, but I definitely don't regard the trip as a loss in that way, because I think we got a little taste of what it would have been like for the Arnold expedition. And frankly, that was enough, you know? It was enough. You know, while I won't pretend that I'm anywhere near as tough as a, you know, old colonial ranger or something, it's important to keep in mind that people died doing this. The Great Carrying Place was a place where a lot of people died hauling those bateaus.
As George W. Bush would say, mission accomplished.
This Misfits bar fell really close to the moose poop.
Now I'm gonna eat it, watch.
Is Benton gonna eat it?
Back down the mountain was more like a roller coaster ride than a Sisyphean torture. And we slid down the mountain fast. We got to the water. It just was like back in my element. I knew that my busted pinky toe was never gonna have to go back in a boot again.
I've missed this lake. Feels like I haven't canoed in months.
It's the longest 2 days of my fucking life, dude.
Andy looks amazing because he stayed in a hotel last night and a chopper took him out of the woods to go to the Ritz-Carlton. He was gambling all night.
Got in the boat and we were off, suddenly into a storm. But the storm, you know, it couldn't get us down. After everything we'd done, we'd learned, we were experienced, we were hardened, we were used to things not going the way we wanted them to, but we still had to go forward.
I caught a big flotsam. I knew there was dead wood on this island, and I got the Leviathan, god of flotsam. Hang on.
It's the morning of day 6.
Day 6, we made our way back across the lake, going against the wind, against the waves, which got a little sketchy at times, but we really worked together to pull it off. You know, it's been a lot of fun retracing the steps of the Arnold expedition for sure, and that's kind of the main reason that we're out here. But the favorite part of the trip for me has been just getting to spend time with my buddy Benton. You know, we live in different cities, we don't see each other all that much, so just sort of reconnecting with him in a very sort of intense one-on-one way, being able to share this time is absolutely magical, and I don't take it for granted at all.
Let's hit it.
Every trip I have like this, you regain a sense of self that gives you both more self-respect, more self-love, more meditative focus, more appreciation for life. Things are hard and you can get through them because you have to, you know. Being human is hard and full of joy and adventure.
There's the bridge, our drop-off point and our destination. We couldn't have asked for a more beautiful day to close out our trip. It's sunny, warm. The wind was against us, but you know, that's just the lake letting us know who's boss. We landed.
Cool. Good to do it.